In the mid-2010s, Detective Gary Sweet of the Garland PD reopened the Barbara Villarreal investigation. He recognized that there was DNA testing that could be accomplished. Blood on the interior of the sliced handball glove and from the blood drips on the front porch still remained in evidence. Sweet arranged for updated testing of these items, which confirmed that the origin of the blood was from an unknown male for whom a profile was obtained. Sweet arranged for the file to be entered into CODIS and the Texas State DNA database. I imagine he was surprised when no hits were obtained. But, on second thought, I'm not sure how surprised he was. He was the first modern investigator who began to question the whole faux identity of Barbara's husband and what it meant for the case. Garland PD Detective William Elstrom was also assigned to the FBI's Violent Crime Task Force, which at the time was starting to tackle cold case sexual assaults and homicides using DNA SNP testing and IgG. The Garland PD reached out to FBI Special Agent Randy White, who identified Barbara's case as one that would qualify. They had blood samples and evidence that could be subjected to modern testing. Agent White facilitated the development of a SNP profile from the blood on the inside of the cut glove and the drops on the porch. And the SNP information directly undercut the story that Domingo Villarreal had told the police all those years ago. He had maintained that a white man and a black man invaded his home and killed his wife. But the SNP profile of the suspect showed that he was Hispanic. The investigators decided that in order to pursue Barbara's case, they needed to identify Domingo once and for all. On July 30th, 2020, Garland Police forensic investigator Katie Tucker and Detective Lucas Shoup met with DPS Ranger Daniel, Detective Hill, and Lieutenant Hunt. At this meeting, they discussed the fact that Barbara's husband had been using the name Domingo Villarreal, but there were two men in the state of Texas with the same name and date of birth, and two different driver's licenses had been issued with different numbers. Barbara's husband had been declared the imposter. So who was he really? These cold case investigators were now trying to reinvestigate a case without knowing the real name of the suspect they were investigating. Investigator Tucker located the old set of fingerprints taken from Domingo Villarreal by the Garland PD when they arrested him back in November 1986 for Barbara's murder. He had been released quickly, but the prints remained on file. And when investigator Tucker ran them through the APHIS system, the prints matched to prints collected in Sterling, Illinois 10 years earlier in 1976, after a local PD arrest of a Jesus Canales. Jesus Canales' booking photo from Sterling in 1976 was pretty much identical to the booking photo of Domingo Villarreal in Garland in 1986. Investigator Tucker contacted the Sterling, Illinois Police Department. This from the police report, quote, "She was able to obtain fingerprint cards. Multiple fingerprint cards from Sterling, Illinois were provided for arrests in 1973 and 1976, where the source was Jesus Canales. Another fingerprint card was provided for an arrest in Illinois in 1978, where the source was identified as Domingo Villarreal. Well, all the fingerprints were from the same person." Investigator Tucker directly compared the Sterling, Illinois prints of Jesus Canales to the prints taken from Domingo Villarreal the night of his arrest in Garland in 1986 and found they were identical. Barbara's husband was not named Domingo Villarreal at all. His name was Jesus Canales. And looking back, there was evidence of this. For one thing, former neighbor Nancy B. recalled that Domingo had two daughters that lived in Illinois and that their names were Jessica and Jennifer. They lived with their mother. Garland investigators obtained birth certificates for both these girls from Sterling, Illinois, and their father was listed as Jesus Canales, a citizen of Mexico. Also, Domingo/Jesus had gotten into a car accident in March 1985 in Garland, and police reports noted that one of his passengers was Barbara Villarreal, and one was a 12-year-old girl named Jessica Canales of Sterling, Illinois. Domingo/Jesus had identified himself as her father. Further, in the search of the Villarreal home, the police had found two documents of note, two Social Security cards with the name of Jesus Canales, and the couple's wedding invitation announcing the upcoming nuptials of Barbara Carr and Jesse Villarreal. And in Barbara's purse found in her home, police located paperwork that had the last name of Canales on it. It seems the original investigators knew that Domingo sometimes went by Jesse. Next-door neighbor Nancy S.'s affidavit about her interactions with both Barbara and Domingo during the week of the murder referred to him as Domingo, but in his affidavit, her boyfriend Mike called him Jesse. Modern-day investigators tracked down Barbara's former friend Nancy S. She told them she knew Barbara's husband at the time to be called Jesse. She believed his actual name was Jesus, and the name Domingo didn't sound familiar to her at all. But it wasn't only friends and neighbors who knew Domingo was really Jesus. Barbara's family also referred to Domingo as Jesse. And Barbara had to know her husband was using a fake name because she was too. Remember, her wedding invitation named her fiancé as Jesus Canales. But when she died, she was using the name Villarreal. Barbara's family, for some reason, had accepted the name change as well. Barbara's obituary in the Logansport, Indiana paper listed her name as Barbara Faye Carr Villarreal. Who knows what Jesus told her and her family about why this subterfuge was necessary. On August 5, 2020, investigator Tucker confirmed that Barbara's mother recalled that the Carr family called Barbara's husband Jesse, which is a nickname for Jesus in Spanish. Detective Shoup located and reviewed the Texas Department of Public Safety reports regarding their investigation into the two men using the name Domingo Diaz Villarreal with the same date of birth. The investigation had concluded in 1988 with the finding that the Domingo Villarreal in Barbara's case was an imposter. I have to say, I don't really understand why this was not all sorted out by the homicide investigators back in 1986. Yes, it's true that even after the murder, Jesus maintained the charade that he was Domingo Villarreal, coming into RMV branches and insisting that he was the real Domingo. But all the evidence pointed to the contrary. They had written proof, Social Security cards, that he was Jesus Canales. So why on earth did the 1986 investigators not figure this out? I think maybe they did, but the investigation petered out once it was shown via blood evidence that Domingo had not been the one who bled at the crime scene. The investigators could not place the blame for Barbara's murder on Domingo/Jesus, and then he evaporated into Mexico, never to be seen again. The whole thing fizzled out as the investigators could not find or talk to him, had no idea who had killed Barbara, just knew that he did not, and soon had to pursue active investigations into current crimes. Okay, so the modern investigators had solved one mystery, the true identity of Barbara's husband, Jesus Canales. It was all very confusing and made them question everything. Could he possibly have been Barbara's murderer after all? They decided to use science to either exclude or include Jesus as a suspect. They already had a SNP profile showing that their subject was Hispanic. They commenced an IgG analysis, uploading the suspect's SNP profile into the open source databases. The matches they received there were very, very low level, fourth and fifth cousins only. Remember that Hispanics, especially first-generation Hispanics, are often not well represented in these databases. So there was insufficient information to determine whether Jesus Canales was connected to these matches. So the Garland investigators and the FBI decided to try something clever. Remember that investigator Tucker had uncovered a Garland PD motor vehicle accident report from 1985 that reflected that Domingo Villarreal and Barbara had been involved in a car crash, and a passenger named Jessica Canales of Sterling, Illinois, was identified as the driver's daughter. So the investigators contacted the city clerk in Sterling and got birth certificates for Jessica and her sister Jennifer. Then in April 2022, Garland police investigators contacted the women they believed were Domingo/Jesus' daughters, Jessica and Jennifer, both of whom lived in Iowa. They both confirmed that their father was Jesus Canales of Rodeo, Mexico, and that he had been married to Barbara and had lived with her in Garland until she was killed. Both women recalled Barbara fondly, saying they had really liked her. They both confirmed that they had been told their father had died in Mexico in 1988 in a shooting. Both Jessica and Jennifer agreed to assist the investigators in trying to learn their father's relationship, if any, to the man who had killed Barbara. Both women agreed to take ancestry DNA tests. Now, I know what you're thinking. Law enforcement is allowed to use only the open-source DNA databases, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, for IgG purposes. So why did they have these women take an ancestry test? The answer is they needed SNP profiles from Jessica and Jennifer to compare to that of the suspect. And for that, they needed commercial DNA testing kits. Ancestry's kits were selected, Jessica and Jennifer's kits were submitted to Ancestry and tested, and while the police could not access those results, they then facilitated the upload of both profiles to GEDmatch, where they had also uploaded the suspect's profile. GEDmatch's relatedness algorithms provided the information they needed. Jessica and Jennifer matched to the suspect profile at a very high centimorgan rate. The amount of DNA they shared with the suspect indicated he was not a close enough relative to be their father, but he was likely a biological uncle. So they were looking for one of Jesus Canales' brothers. Reports from Barbara's family about Domingo/Jesus and from his daughters told them that he had two brothers, Juan Canales and Liborio Canales. Now it all made sense. Jesus had conspired with one of his brothers to kill his wife and had protected him when the investigators questioned him. And in reviewing the case files, the investigators noted that way back in 1987, Barbara's stepdad, Alan Dunderman, had reported that Jesus told him that someone named Liborio Canales had killed Barbara. He had also mentioned Juan Canales. So investigators dug into Juan and Liborio. Open record searches told them that Juan lived in Mexico, which matched what Barbara's family had told them back in the 1990s. He had a DUI arrest in 1991. Liborio, though, lived in Mexico and would be more difficult to probe. The investigators started surveillance on Juan. He lived with his wife in a trailer in Edgewood, New Mexico. The investigators worked with the local fire department to install pole cameras to watch him. But they learned that he was a paranoid loner who surrounded his home with cameras. He was watching them. Gathering a surreptitious DNA sample would be very tough. They watched him for weeks, but he didn't emerge much, and when he didn't abandon any items which would contain DNA. His little black Shih Tzu did, but let's not go there. In one incident, on the 18th of July, they watched as Juan walked out of the trailer and into the rear yard, carrying a shovel, bucket, and black bag. That's not suspicious. He returned to the residence without these items. Shady. Finally, the FBI decided to try a different tactic. On December 7, 2022, Special Agent Randy White and Task Force Officer William Elmstrom, along with personnel from the FBI Albuquerque Special Surveillance Group, followed Juan as he went to the Edgewood Walmart. Inside the Walmart, TFO Elmstrom had a brilliant idea. As they prowled around behind Juan, he called the lab and asked if he could get Juan's baseball hat, which looked old, if it would contain DNA. The lab said, yeah, if it's something he's been wearing for a while, the brim should have DNA on it. With that, TFO Elmstrom approached Juan. He said, I like your hat. What? Said Juan. I really like your hat. Any chance I can have it? I'm not giving you my hat, said Juan. Elmstrom reached into his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill. He said, how about if I give you $100 for it? Juan handed over the gnarly hat. Elmstrom handed over the cash, and both were happy. In case prosecution was forthcoming, the agents also collected the video evidence from Walmart of the hat cash exchange. On December 8th, the hat was sent to Swifts for comparison testing against the blood sample in evidence, and in January 2023, the lab tests on the hat came back. Juan was not their man. Just as an aside, I really had to know what the logo was on the hat. I didn't think Elmstrom could get away with offering Juan $100 for a basic used hat that said Gap or Nike. It had to be something distinctive to make it believable that he would want to buy it. I bugged Detective Shoup about it until he found the information for me. It was a faded gray hat with a brown Duck Commander logo on it. Look it up. You can easily find them online. And they're about $85 cheaper than the amount TFO Elmstrom ponied up for the one Juan was wearing. Your tax dollars at work. Speaking of your tax dollars at work, all the months the FBI had expended watching Juan were a bust. It was on now to the next known brother to Jesus, Liborio Canales. He seemed like an unlikely suspect since their research indicated that at the time of the murder, he was 49 years old. He was quite a bit older than the typical suspect in such a brutal, bloody, and vicious stabbing homicide. But the process of elimination indicated that it was him. It was going to be a challenge to gather DNA from Liborio. He currently lived in Rodeo, Mexico. But the investigators learned that Liborio had two daughters who lived right across the street from each other on the 900 block of East Madison Avenue in Lovington, New Mexico. Liborio had listed one of the addresses, the home of his daughter, whom I'm calling Ariana, as his U.S. address for purposes of his resident alien status. The father-daughter relationship was verified through social media research, an example of one of the infinite ways Facebook helps investigators and genealogists glean information about their subjects. On February 15, 2023, law enforcement officers recovered the trash from Ariana's house in Lovington and from her sister's house across the street. Several items were removed from the trash and sent to Swifts for kinship DNA analysis. The lab found female DNA on a water bottle in the trash. Their report stated that the female donor of the DNA could not be excluded as being the biological daughter of the suspect male profile from the DNA left at the 1986 crime scene. the probability of selecting at random an unrelated individual who would be included as possible biological child of the male was 1 in 3.41 million, the most conservative statistic. The report says the investigators believe this female to be the biological daughter of Laborio Canales, and she is not excluded as the biological daughter of the suspect. So this test result was sufficient to provide the investigators with probable cause to arrest Laborio Canales. In March 2023, Detective Lucas Shoup wrote in a probable cause affidavit, quote, "Investigators believe that the Domingo Villarreal, who was married to the victim Barbara Villarreal and who was arrested on the night of the murder, is in fact Jesus Canales." Investigators further believe that Jesus lied to detectives on the night of his arrest about the circumstances of his wife's death. The person who stabbed Barbara cut themselves badly and left blood evidence at the crime scene. However, that person was not Jesus himself. Investigators believe the murder was committed by the brother of Jesus, Laborio Canales. Based on the above information, I'm requesting a warrant be issued for Laborio Canales for the murder of Barbara Villarreal." End quote. Judge John Sholden of the Garland Municipal Court signed the arrest warrant for Laborio Canales on March 10, 2023. Now, they had to figure out how to get him. They can't just march into Mexico and extract a Mexican citizen and bring him back over the border. And they weren't in a hurry. Social media indicated that Laborio returned to the U.S. on occasion to visit his daughters. Furthermore, his work visa required that he spend a certain number of days in the U.S. in twice-yearly visits. Family social media indicated that his crossings were typically in the May-June timeframe and around December. Investigators were content to wait it out and allow Laborio to fall into their trap. It took longer than they hoped. Early summer 2023 came and went, and Laborio did not cross. They looked at his family's social media and noted that one of his daughters had recently traveled from Lovington, New Mexico, to Mexico to visit her father. In Mexico, they'd taken a vacation into the mountainous region and gone to the beach. Detective Shoup told me he started to worry that Laborio was too old to travel long distances. He was well into his 80s. Then it happened. On July 17, 2023, at 12:37 p.m., Detective Shoup received a call from Special Agent Randy White. White reported that he had just received a notice that Laborio Canales had crossed into the United States from Mexico at Eagle Pass pedestrian crossing. Detective Shoup and Detective Jake Lambert left for New Mexico immediately. They assumed they would go straight to Lovington since Laborio would go to one of his daughter's homes. But then they learned that Ariana had recently moved to Hobbs, New Mexico. Her sister, Laborio's other daughter, whom I am calling Heloisa, still lived on East Madison in Lovington. It was anyone's guess which home he would go to. They had to watch both. Pole cameras had been installed outside both homes, but they had to be ready to move if Laborio showed up. Detective Shoup met with a team at the Lovington PD at 7 a.m. on July 18th. He handed out photos of Laborio and told them what they knew about him. On the evening of the 17th, around 7:35 p.m., the pole camera on East Madison recorded a white SUV pulling into the driveway of Heloisa's house. This Chevy Suburban was still parked at the house. Detective Shoup and Special Agent White suspected that Suburban was how Laborio Canales had crossed and that he was at Heloisa's right now. As the detectives staked out the house, late morning they saw a young Hispanic male come out of the house, get into a black GMC pickup parked outside, and drive off. But the pole camera also recorded that another black truck had driven away from Heloisa's house at 7 a.m. on the 18th and had not returned. Detective Shoup didn't want to just sit there and wait. By 12:30 p.m., they decided to stir the pot and knocked on Heloisa's door to see if Laborio was inside. Detective Shoup and Detective Lambert grabbed an interpreter from Lovington PD, Officer Gomez, and they approached the home. At their knock, Heloisa answered the door. Through the interpreter, Officer Gomez, Detective Shoup explained to her that he was looking into an old case and asked if it was okay if they'd come in to speak with her. She allowed them inside the house. She confirmed that she was Heloisa and that her son had just gone to pick up her father, Laborio Canales, and bring him back to her home. She confirmed that her father lived in Mexico and that she had picked him up the previous day. Detective Shoup told Heloisa that they were looking into a case in Garland. She knew her father had stayed there for a time and that a lady had died. Shoup asked, "Is there any way we can speak to Laborio?" And Heloisa said he was down the street at a friend's house. Detective Shoup pressed her for details, and she described the location of a house on a highway heading south out of Lovington, next to the Pioneer Steakhouse at Simpson Drive. Detective Shoup conveyed to the surveillance team where Laborio was suspected to be and that there would be a black pickup truck at that location. Then he made small talk with Heloisa until he got the radio call that the officers had Liborio in custody. He told Heloisa that Liborio had been located and that he was going to talk to him right now. That was true. He was going to talk to Liborio, and it was about an old case. Liborio was brought to the Levington PD and placed in an interview room for a custodial interview. Heloisa was not very happy with Detective Shoup. Detective Shoup told me that he did not think that Liborio would speak with them, but it was worth a try, and he surprised them. Present in the interview were Special Agent White, TFO Martinez, Levington Police Officer Gomez, Detective Lambert, and Detective Shoup. The interview was conducted in Spanish by TFO Martinez, as Liborio did not speak English. Liborio was wearing tan pants and an old white t-shirt. He is probably 5'5" on a good day and looks extremely old. He identified himself as Liborio Canales. And when they asked him about the murder of his brother's wife, Barbara Villarreal, he admitted everything. Well, in my opinion, not everything, but a lot. Liborio said he had contacted his brother Jesus and asked if he could travel to the U.S. to come and stay with him and Barbara at their Garland home. He said they said no, and he was angry. He found out their address from his and Jesus' mother. He traveled hours to get to Dallas, and he went into the home and killed Barbara. Why did you do this? The investigators asked. Liborio said Barbara wanted him gone. She didn't like me and she didn't accept me. Did you have a grudge? They asked. More or less, he said. Why? They said. Because she didn't like me, he said again. TFO Martinez asked Liborio, how many stabs? He said, I don't know, but I did it. How many times? Martinez said. I'm not sure exactly. 100? Maybe more, I don't know. When asked how he did it, Liborio made stabbing motions with his right hand. Then he showed the officers the scars on his fingers, consistent with the slashed fingers on the glove that was found. This finger is not the same, he demonstrated. Yes, I left the bloody gloves there. Then the investigators asked Liborio if Jesus was involved. No, he said, my brother was not there, and if he was, I would have killed him too. He reiterated that he was mad at Barbara and to a lesser extent at Domingo because he had helped them when they came to Mexico for a visit, but now they weren't coming through on help when he wanted it. Liborio confirmed that Domingo was killed in Mexico in the late 80s, and he agreed to give a DNA sample. Then he was booked into the Lea County Detention Center on a federal warrant for murder. The buccal swabs collected from Liborio were transported to the Garland PD and released to forensic investigator Katie Tucker. Testing showed Liborio was a match to the blood drops on the porch and the blood inside the cut glove. The investigators then called Kathy, Deborah's sister. She said she was disbelieving but joyful that the case had been solved at long last. She set up a family call to inform Barbara's extended family. She said later that they all knew Domingo Villarreal had to be at the bottom of it. This is from the Dallas Morning News. Quote, members of Villarreal's family told the news that the arrest has brought some closure, but her younger brother Mark Dunderman said it doesn't change much else. Dunderman, who lives in Indiana, visited with Garland detectives multiple times about his sister's case in recent years. It doesn't fix what happened, but it does give us enough so at least we don't walk through life with questions anymore, he said, end quote. Liborio Canales was arraigned on August 19, 2023, with his bond set at $1.5 million because he was deemed a flight risk. He could not pay the amount required to secure his release, and so he remained in jail. And on March 12, 2024, 86-year-old Liborio Canales pleaded guilty to the murder of Barbara Carr Villarreal. In the plea agreement, Liborio checked the box that reflected he was pleading guilty to intentionally causing the death of the victim, a first-degree felony, and agreed to the affirmative finding that he had used a weapon, a knife. He signed a very concise and dry judicial confession stating that, quote, on or about the 7th day of November 1986 in Dallas County, Texas, I did unlawfully, then and there, intentionally and knowingly, cause the death of Barbara Faye Villarreal, hereafter called deceased, by stabbing deceased with a knife, a deadly weapon, end quote. Pursuant to the plea agreement, he relinquished his right to appeal, and as called for by the agreement, the judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Barbara's mother, aged 93, was present for the sentencing all the way from Illinois. Barbara's sister-in-law, Jennifer Dunderman, spoke on behalf of the family, thanking the Garland police who, quote, never stopped looking for the person who so violently took Barb. And she also thanked the Dallas County DA's office for making sure Barbara, Kathy, Deborah, and Mark's, quote, 93-year-old mother will never again have to worry about who killed her daughter. Jennifer addressed Liborio directly, in tears, saying, Quote, "You spent 37 years of your life as if nothing happened. The life you lived should be considered a gift. You didn't just kill Barb, you killed a little piece of everyone she knew. So many years have passed, and the desire for you to suffer the same pain you caused her has passed. It would serve no purpose and will never bring her back." Barbara's brother, Mark Dunderman, told NBC Dallas-Fort Worth, quote, "We're happy that there's closure. It doesn't reverse any of the pain that she suffered at the end of her life and the void we all have and have had for nearly 40 years. A news release issued on March 14, 2024, cited the conviction of Laborio Canales as the first Dallas County murder conviction using investigative genetic genealogy to help identify a suspect. Dallas County DA John Cruzat said in a press release, quote, "Investigative genetic genealogy is no longer the future of solving violent crimes. It is very much the present." Hear, hear. Dallas County ADA Leighton D'Antoni said, quote, "Leads were exhausted and there were plenty of roadblocks, but ultimately, we brought Barbara and her family the justice they have waited so long for. It's justice delayed, but it's absolutely justice," he told the Dallas Morning News. Okay, so who was Jesus Canales after all that? I have no idea what his real birth date was, and I'm not even sure who his real parents were. Detectives' notes say he was abandoned at 3 years old and was taken in by a family member, possibly a grandmother, in Durango. Jesus apparently told everyone in Barbara's family that he was born in Indiana, which was definitely a lie. His daughters reported that he grew up in Rodeo, and his parents were Severiano Canales and Hortensia Nieves, who went by Lupe. And we know a little more about him thanks to an interview FBI Special Agent Randy White and TFO Bill Elstrom conducted of Adolfo B. in April 2022. Adolfo grew up in Rodeo, Durango, Mexico. He knew Jesus, a.k.a. Jesse Canales, who was 2 years older. They both served in the Mexican army. Jesus was assigned to Monterrey, Mexico, and worked doing grounds maintenance for the residence of a colonel. Adolfo believed that Jesus moved to the United States sometime around 1970. He had many, more than 25 friends in the Mineola, Texas area when he was living in Garland. After his death, Adolfo heard from family members that Jesus was working as a drug trafficker and was killed by a cartel. Adolfo wasn't certain whether Jesus was killed by his own cartel or a competitive cartel. He claimed not to know the name of the cartel that Jesus was affiliated with. Adolfo shared what he knew about Jesus' family, which involved some drama. He said one of Jesus' brothers was Laborio Canales. Laborio worked as a welder and lived in Dallas, Texas for a few years, but then returned to Rodeo. Another brother was Venancio Canales. A brother, half-brother, or cousin was Jose Canales, who lived with Jesus and his wife for 3 or 4 years at his home in Garland. And then there was Porfirio Canales, who was a cousin of Jesus. Finally, he had a sister named Lupe Canales. Adolfo left out Juan Canales, the brother of Jesus who had sold his baseball hat to the FBI in Walmart. But Adolfo told the investigators that the cousin he named, Porfirio Canales, killed Jose Canales, the brother or cousin of Jesus. After this murder, Porfirio fled Rodeo, Mexico, and ended up in the Chicago, Illinois area. This from the FBI report on Adolfo's interview, quote, "Jesus and his brothers flipped coins to determine who would travel to Chicago to kill Porfirio, and it was ultimately decided that would be Jesus. Jesus said he found Porfirio in Chicago and killed him. However, Porfirio's sister, Rebecca Canales, told Adolfo that Porfirio was killed in a shootout with the police, in which he also killed 2 officers. Adolfo did not know which story, if either, was true," end quote. Well, I can tell you which story is true, not Jesus' version. Once again, he proved to be lying. An Associated Press report from September 27, 1971, details a shootout between Chicago police officers and Porfirio Canales, aged 24. The article says that patrolman Steve Barnes and Daniel Conlon were summoned to an alley in downtown Chicago after a woman reported seeing 2 men loading guns in the alley. When the officers arrived, they saw a man running with a revolver and ordered him to stop. This was Porfirio Canales, who turned and fired at the officers, shooting Barnes in the right thigh. According to the AP article, quote, "The patrolman returned fire, wounding Canales in the chest, legs, and arms. His condition was not known," end quote. A bystander was also injured. Canales, I can only assume, died. In November 1971, Jesus had gotten married to a woman named Diane C. Their wedding reception for 150 people was at Emerald Hill Country Club. They went on to have daughters Jessica and Jennifer together. They lived in Sterling, Illinois, where, in September 1974, their house burned down. Diane and the girls were staying at her grandma's at the time, and Jesus was at work in all the air quotes. The fire broke out at 2:30 a.m., and the house was a total loss. I don't have any more details on this, but knowing what we know about Jesus, if I were an arson expert, I'd be taking an extra look at that fire. I was able to dig up arrest records for Jesus Canales in Sterling, Illinois. There was nothing crazy. In October 1972, he was cited for an unattended vehicle. In April of 1973, he got a DUI. Then on July 8, 1973, he was charged with reckless conduct and unlawful use of a weapon. The reports for those incidents are long gone, but clearly something significant happened on that date. Then, in early 1976, he was cited twice for driving while license revoked. This dude has a lot of driver's license problems, am I right? He also had a DUI that year. In April of that year, he was fined and given 10 days in jail for that offense. Later that year, he was the subject of a complaint about a stolen bicycle, and then, in October of 76, a burglary complaint was filed against him. I don't know what came of these allegations or whether formal charges were ever actually filed. He had another arrest in Galesburg, Illinois in 1978 for unlawful use of weapons and no ID card. This was in connection with the incident in which a neighbor called him a racial slur and Jesus threatened to kill the guy. Jesus Canales' first wife, Diane, filed for divorce in May of 1978, citing mental cruelty. The divorce was granted in July of 78, and she was awarded custody of the two daughters. In April of 2022, Jesus' daughter Jessica was interviewed by FBI Special Agent Randy White and TFO Bill Elstrom. She said she had been told that her father was one of 18 children. The only siblings she could recall were a brother named Laborio and a sister who went by the name Natja. She had no contact with her father's family. She said that she and her sister Jennifer and her mom's sister and grandma all traveled to Garland when she was 12 and her sister was 10 to visit her father Jesus. That was when they got in the car accident. She said in Garland, her father had been married to a woman named Barbara who was very kind to the girls, and Jessica really liked her. Jessica believed her father Jesus also had other children. She had heard from her mother that he possibly had a child with the woman who babysat Jessica and Jennifer. The child was a boy and would have been born in the Sterling, Illinois area. She said her father also had several children in Mexico. She knew he had two daughters that were older than she and her sister, but couldn't remember their names. These women were living in Guadalajara, and she didn't have any contact with them. Her father also had two more children in Guadalajara shortly before his death. Jessica told the FBI agent that around age 20, she moved to Rodeo, Mexico, and lived with her father's family for about a year. During that time, her uncle, Laborio Canales, took her to Guadalajara to the police department to obtain a copy of her father's death certificate. It indicated that he had been shot to death in Guadalajara in 1988. I saw the death certificate. It documents that Jesus Canales died on May 18, 1988, in the Mexican state of Jalisco from a gunshot wound that penetrated his thorax. About crimes her father had committed, Jessica said that when she lived with her father's family in Rodeo, they were one of only two families in the entire town that had a car. They lived in a much nicer house than everyone else, and she remembered that her father's house in Garland was a big, beautiful house in a very nice neighborhood. She believed that the family, including her father, was involved in drug trafficking, which was how they were able to afford these nice things. Several times she said her father was a very bad man and he did very bad things. Her mother had told her that Jesus was friends with a man named Flavio, possible last name of Rodriguez. The two of them were involved in a shooting at a Latin club in Sterling, Illinois. After the shooting, Jesus was threatened and told to leave Illinois and never come back. This explanation was given to Jessica and her sister for why her parents divorced and her father moved to Texas. I have not been able to locate any information about this incident, and it sounds like something else Jesus made up. Then Jessica said something odd. She said that sometime in the mid-90s, she received a phone call from an anonymous man whose voice sounded like her father's. He did not identify himself, but called her Mija, which she described as a term of endearment usually said from a father to a daughter. He said he was calling to reassure her that everything would be okay, and then he hung up. He never called again. FBI Special Agent White and TFO Elstrom next interviewed Jessica's sister, Jennifer. She gave largely the same information as Jessica. She didn't even know who her dad was until the trip to Garland in 1985, and she never saw her father again after that. Jennifer said that she received a phone call during the mid-1990s from a man who identified himself as a cousin to her father. She couldn't recall his name, but said he called her Mija, what she described as something a father says to a daughter. In the phone call, he said in English he was calling to reassure her that everything would be okay. He said he was living in the Berkeley, California area. Okay, so are you thinking what I'm thinking? Is there any way that Jesus Canales faked his own death? I know, it sounds like something out of an implausible thriller, but so does much of this case. The identity of the man who called both of Jesus Canales' daughters from California, reassuring them that everything would be okay using pet terms reserved for daughters, has never been established. Jesus Canales was in the habit of calling family members. Remember how he called Barbara's family several times after her death. Barbara's mom, Janet, believed that Jesus' abandoning his perfectly good pickup truck near a Garland lake and then disappearing right after Barbara's murder was part of a plot to fake his own death. Is it possible that he was actually alive and living under yet another new identity? In 2022, the FBI contacted their Mexico City Legat, or bureau, and requested that they locate the file on the homicide investigation of Jesus Canales. It appeared from the records that such a file had existed, but it was missing and has never been located. And that mind-boggling question of whether Jesus Canales could have faked his own death is just one of many unanswered questions we have in this case. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people who declined to speak with me about this case. The Dallas DA's office did not answer my many questions, and Barbara's family did not respond when I reached out to them. So I'm left to speculate using the information that I have gathered as a foundation for my theories. Was Jesus Canales behind the murder of his wife Barbara, which was carried out by his brother Liborio? You heard what Liborio said. He killed Barbara because he was angry with her and Jesus. But I don't buy that, and neither did the authorities down in Dallas. Leighton D'Antoni, the Dallas County ADA who put Liborio away, told the Dallas Morning News that he firmly believes Jesus was involved in Barbara's death. Frankly, there is no other possible explanation. If Liborio were telling the truth and he went to the house and killed Barbara because he was angry with her, then why on earth would his brother Jesus have protected him by not revealing his identity to the police? But he never did, and in fact, he claimed 2 unknown intruders broke in and killed Barbara. Further, we know that the murder was planned, and Domingo was in on it. Remember, Domingo was the one who stole the murder weapon pizza knife from his former neighbor, Nancy B. It's not an accident that Liborio got his hands on it, used it to kill Barbara, and left it at the scene. Since it didn't match any knives in the home, it proved to police the presence of an intruder. So did the bloody gloves, which exhibited cuts that would have sliced the finger of the wearer, not Jesus. The bloody shoes and jeans found in the house showed that Liborio changed out of these incriminating items before leaving the home after killing Barbara, with the help of his brother, who provided him with a shower, remember the wet towels, and fresh clothing, and made sure he made a clean getaway before stumbling next door and telling Mike and Nancy to call police. All these things were designed to shift the focus of the investigators away from Jesus, but not onto his brother, onto 2 made-up home invaders. Even back in 1987, Jesus' jumbled and inconsistent stories about blackmails, white males, stolen guns, and forced oral sex were always too outlandish to be believed. What's frustrating to me is that there's no evidence that the blood on Domingo's clothing and hands was ever tested. If that blood had come back to Liborio, that would completely destroy Jesus' tale of unknown intruders. If the blood came back to Barbara, it would also undermine his story that he never touched her or checked on her before he left the house. One thing that the 1994 reinvestigation uncovered was that a number of the Villarreal's neighbors, friends, co-workers, and family related that an older brother of the man they knew as Domingo had lived with him and Barbara for several months in 1985, and that she did not get along with him at all and asked him to leave. This brother was named by several people as being Liborio, possibly supporting the claim that he had a beef with Barbara. It's worth noting that both Barbara's mom, Janet, and her best friend, Lisa, told police that they believed Jesus and his brother planned and carried out Barbara's murder. Lisa said in a written statement, quote, "In my opinion, I feel Domingo and his brother planned this. Domingo is not a smart person at all. It is hard to understand how he got away with this," end quote. Remember that Jesus almost told Barbara's family the truth. Jesus had told the family Liborio and Juan were involved. Was Juan there that day as well? We don't know. Another unknown question is, why did Liborio take Jesus' 2 guns when he left the house? Were the guns a form of payment from Jesus to his brother or brothers for doing the deed? Or was this another tactic designed to make it appear that bad guys had really entered the home and stolen stuff? Another burning question I have is, why did Jesus bother repeatedly to call Barbara's family after the murder? Well, there's only one answer. He was trying to look like a good guy, like he was pursuing justice for her. Because Domingo was one of the beneficiaries of the life insurance policy on Barbara and was also set to inherit 1/3 of her estate. He maintained communication with the family while the insurance claim was being investigated and the estate settled. And he and his attorney filed papers in support of his argument that he was entitled to 100% of Barbara's estate. This bid failed, but he did legally merit 1/3 of the estate. In September 1987, when the estate was settled, per his request, the Carr family attorney had bought the bereaved husband a plane ticket from Tijuana to Garland for him to come back and collect his money. He never showed the first time, possibly afraid of being arrested, but again requested a ticket, this time from LA to DFW, and this time he arrived and collected $85,000, a large amount of money in 1987. As for Laborio, when he was finally arrested, why did he not throw his brother under the bus? He said of the night of the murder, "My brother was not there, and if he was, I would have killed him too." We know this isn't true, because his brother Jesus admitted from the beginning that he was there. He was there when a black male and a white male held him at gunpoint and stabbed Barbara to death. Jesus made those two men up and protected his brother, even letting himself be tied up and his pants pulled down as if he'd been sexually assaulted. And finally, the biggest question of all, why? Why did Jesus Canales engineer the murder of his own wife, forming an alliance with his brother that neither of them broke when the shit hit the fan? Barbara made no secret of the fact that she and Jesus were not getting along. She challenged him on his drinking and guns, and he inflicted domestic violence on her. But Jesus could not allow Barbara to divorce him. She was the breadwinner, providing an upstanding, legal facade for his life, allowing him to hide whatever nefarious activities he was up to. Apparently, 2 of the life insurance policies on her were set to expire, and Jesus did not want to walk away from the insurance policy money and Barbara's estate. Nope, he had to get rid of Barbara, using someone he trusted not to reveal his secret, all while distancing himself as much as possible from the actual murder. Think about the level of scheming that went into Barbara's slaying. Remember that Lisa, Barbara's friend and co-worker, told the investigators that on the night she died, Barbara's husband Jesus had told her he had a surprise for her and was picking her up from work. That had literally never happened before. This meant that Barbara's car remained at her workplace, and she and Jesus went back to get it later. That ensured that Barbara was driving herself, and Domingo ensured that she arrived at the home before he did. He knew that his brother would be waiting to ambush her as she walked from the garage into the game room. Her purse and car keys were found next to her body. He wanted her dead, but he didn't necessarily want to see it happen. But I think things got a little out of hand. I think Barbara fought back much more than anticipated. She was stabbed many, many times, and there ended up being blood all over the room. Remember that someone had tried to clean the blood off the carpet. Laborio ended up cutting himself badly, getting blood all over himself and his clothing. Jesus had to help him change and escape the scene, taking the guns with him to make it look like a robbery. No doubt, Laborio was the one who tied Jesus' hands with the twine found in the house to bolster his story of being attacked by unknown home invaders. Detective Lucas Shoup and I agreed that Jesus Canales was diabolical. All the lies, the stolen identities, gambling, guns, drug dealing, murder, and who knows what else. The man who introduced Barbara and Jesus, Pete M., told investigators that Jesus' nickname in the Mexican neighborhood he lived in was Liar. Well, how fitting. This case reminds me very much of the case of Lee Rotatori, which I aired recently as a repeat episode. Both women were successful, sweet, and innocent, and simply fell under the charms of the wrong person. The person they trusted the most betrayed them, costing them their lives. After 26 years, the case of Barbara Villarreal is closed thanks to IGG. And if you're one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thank you so much to Garland, Texas Police Detective Lucas Shoup for speaking with me about this case. I hope you all heard my announcement about CrimeCon 2026 in Las Vegas. This event is being held the last weekend of May, and once again, DNA ID will be on Creators Row. I've had so much fun meeting so many listeners over the past few years at CrimeCon, and I can't wait to do it again. Please make sure to buy your badge using my voucher code DNA ID, all one word. That will save you 10% off the price of admission, and it will also help the show secure a spot for next year. Again, that's voucher code DNA ID to save 10% off your standard admission badge. Hope to see you there. And for those of you who are interested in interacting with other listeners of the show, discussing the episodes and all things DNA ID, please consider joining the Facebook discussion page called DNA ID Podcast Discussion. Hope to see you all there as well. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. Before you leave, please let me tell you about some important things related to the show. If you'd like to support this podcast and in the process, get access to early and ad-free episodes as well as bonus content like crime scene photos, you can sign up for a Patreon subscription for only $5 a month by heading over to patreon.com/DNAID. Of course, you're welcome to contribute more than $5 a month. We rely on Patreon funds to pay for the original source materials I use to research each episode. If Patreon isn't your thing, you can also show your support with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts. It costs just $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. Your AbJack Insider subscription will give you the same benefits for not only DNA ID, but for all of the shows on the AbJack network, like Killer Communications and Campus Killings. Head over to Apple Podcasts and find the DNA ID page or look for the AbJack network to get started. If you're on social media, we'd love to interact with you there. DNA ID is on every major social media platform. Search your favorite platforms for DNA ID Podcast to find us. We also have a YouTube channel, and our website is dnaidpodcast.com. You can find links to all of these anytime in our show notes. If you need to reach the show, contact us by emailing dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, if you want to pick up some fun DNA ID merch and represent the show, visit the store at www.customizedgirl.com/s/DNA ID podcast. DNA ID is researched, written, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt.